Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 8 Attitudes and Persuasive Communications. People use the term attitude in many contexts. I'm sure you have heard in your daily conversations. For example, when a friend asks you, what is your attitude toward smoking, or what is your attitude toward abortion, or you may have heard from a parent, I don't like your attitude sentence. These are the general contexts and frequently used sentences that includes attitude word. However, for consumer researchers, attitude is defined differently, and I will explain how we define attitudes as consumer researchers in my next slide. But you should know that it is important for consumer researchers to understand the nature and power of attitudes. That's why we have this chapter, and in this chapter, we will review the contents of an attitude, how we form attitudes, and how we measure them. We will also review some of the surprisingly complex relationships between attitudes and behavior, and then we will take a closer look at how marketers can change these attitudes. For our purposes, an attitude is a lasting general evaluations of people, objects, or issues that tend to last. We also tend to be predictive of behavior and to endure over time. Anything toward which one has an attitude is known as an attitude object. Psychologist Daniel Katz developed the functional theory of attitudes to explain how attitudes facilitate social behavior. According to Kant's approach of functional theory of attitudes, attitudes exist because they serve some function for the people. Consumers who expect that they will need to deal with similar situations at a future time will be more likely to start to form an attitude in anticipation. As a result, it is helpful for marketers to know why an attitude is held before he or she tries to change it. That's why we are covering this chapter called Attitudes. According to functional theory of attitudes, there are different attitude functions. Utilitarian function relates to the basic principles of reward and punishment that we learned about in chapter 4. We develop some attitudes toward products simply because they provide pleasure or pain. If a person likes the taste of a cheeseburger, for example, that person will develop a positive attitude toward cheeseburgers. Or advertising that stress straightforward product benefits appeal to the utilitarian function. For example, you should drink Coke just for the taste it. You should drink Diet Coke because it is zero sugar. These are all utilitarian functions and the straightforward product benefits to the consumer. Value expressive function um, relate to the consumer self-concept that we covered in chapter 6 and the central values that we learned in chapter 7. A person forms a product attitude in this case because of what the product says about him or her as a person. Value expressive attitudes also are highly relevant to the psychographic analysis that we discussed in chapter 7, you might remember, which consider how consumers cultivate a cluster of activities, interests, and opinions to express a particular social identity. So, with value expressive function, products are either catering to your self concept idea or to your central values. The third function is ego defensive function. Attitudes we form to products either from external threats or internal feelings perform an ego defensive function. For example, an early marketing study showed that housewives resisted to use of instant coffee because it threatened their conception of themselves as capable homemakers. So here, if you feel an external threat to your identity, to yourself, or you have internal feelings, then the products have ego defensive function for you. And lastly, the knowledge function. We form some attitudes because we need order, structure, or meaning. A knowledge function applies when a person is in ambiguous situation, doesn't know what to do. For example, it's okay to wear casual pants to work, but only on Fridays. Or when he or she confronts a new product. Here, the knowledge function takes place in this situation. When you are seeing a new product that you don't have experience before, or when you are in an ambiguous situation about a product use. We have attitudes almost about everything. Attitudes are learned and long standing, and they might develop over a long period of time, or they can also abruptly change over time. For example, you might like your instructor for much of the semester until she returns your first exam. The one thing attitudes have in common for everyone is their ability to influence our decisions and actions. An attitude consists of three components. The cognitive component reflects a person's belief system or what we believe to be true. The affective component involves emotions or what we feel about the same issue at hand, including our like or dislike of something. And lastly, the behavioral component it pertains to the actions we undertake based on what we know and feel. So, cognitive and affective component is actually affecting our behavioral component, which is our intention to behave in a certain way towards someone or something. Let's review the example. My cognitive component on exercising, my belief, my thoughts are that exercise is a healthy thing to do. My feelings, my emotions, my affective component of attitude toward exercising is that exercise makes me feel fresh. Every time I exercise, I feel fresh, I feel refreshed. Therefore, due to my cognitive and my affective components, my behavioral component, which is my activity or intention on how to behave, is that I work out 4 times a week as an action to as a reaction to my affective component and to my cognitive component. My activity, my behavior, my reaction is go to the gym and work out 4 times a week. My overall attitude towards exercising is that exercise is a good thing. And to come up with an overall evaluation on overall attitude towards exercising, I use my affective, behavioral, and cognitive components of attitude. Although attitudes are pervasive and usually slow to change, the important fact from a marketer's point of view is that they can be influenced and perhaps changed through persuasive communications and personal experience. Marketing communication through salespeople, advertisement, free samples, or other methods can attempt to change what people believe to be true about a product or service, which is the cognitive component, or how they feel toward it, which is the affective component. If the marketing communication is successful, the cognitive and affective components work in concert to affect behavior. Let's look at the Avengers advertising on the slide. Based on the positive reviews, which is the cognitive component, to go to a website and read the positive reviews and ratings of the fans, a positive feelings, which is the affective component, the emotional part, many movie watchers will go to see the latest Avengers movie, which is the action part, behavioral component, and to come away with a positive attitude towards the movie, which is the overall attitude towards Avengers movie. So cognitive component and affective component. Cognitive comes from the positive reviews. Based on positive reviews, you generate positive feelings and take an action and go and see the movie, which is the behavioral component. The cognitive and affective component actually influences on your behavior. So you decide to go and watch the movie, and as a result, your overall attitude forms towards Avengers movie. How this happens? Through marketing communications. That's why this chapter is called Attitudes and Persuasive Communications, which we use for in our marketing campaign, in our marketing communication tools, such as advertising or personal sale or professional sale. Okay, now that we covered the cognitive, affective, and behavioral competence, which come first? Knowing, feeling, or doing? It turns out that each element may lead things off depending on the situation. Attitude researchers developed the concept of hierarchy of effects to explain the relative impact of the three components. The high involvement hierarchy assumes that a person approaches a product decision as a problem solving process. First, the consumer forms beliefs about a product as he or she accumulates knowledge, which are the beliefs, regarding the relevant attributes of the product. Next, he or she evaluates these beliefs and forms a feeling about the product, which is the affective component. Then the consumer engages in relevant behavior, such as when he or she buys the product. In the low involvement hierarchy of effects, it is assumed that the consumer initially doesn't have a strong preference for one brand over another. Instead, he or she acts on the basis of limited knowledge and forms an evaluation only after he or she has bought the product. And lastly, according to the experiential hierarchy of effects, we act on the basis of our emotional reactions. The experiential perspective highlights the idea that intangible product attributes such as the package design, advertising, brand names, the color of the packaging, the fonts, the nature of the setting in which the shopping experience occurs, can help to shape our attitudes towards a brand. We may base these reactions on hedonic motivations, such as whether the product is exciting like the Nintendo Wii or aesthetically pleasing like Apple iPhone. Again, let's see the three hierarchies of effect on a matrix. With the high involvement hierarchy of effects, it's we start with cognition, we develop beliefs, and then our feelings formed, and we take an action, which is our behavioral component. So the attitude forms based on cognitive information processing. In law of involvement hierarchy of facts, it starts again with thinking, which is the cognition. Then we go and buy the product, and our feelings, our emotional component of attitude, which is our effect, occurs after product usage. So attitude is based on behavioral learning processes. We first learn, we first try the product, and then our feelings, our emotional attitude occurs. In experiential hierarchy of effects, we first have feelings towards brands and products, either because they are visually appealing or either because we pursue them prestigious or we pursue them that they relate to our self-concept idea. Then we go and buy the product, and after experiencing it, our cognitive component, cognitive attitude forms. So the attitude is actually based on hedonic consumption, which is based on emotions, not due to utilitarian functions of the product. The attitude is based on the overall attitude towards the brand and product is based on hedonic consumption, which is again based on the affective component. That means that our consumption forms based on our emotions and feelings. Consumers are different in their commitment to an attitude. Their degree of commitment relates to their level of involvement with the attitude object. The lowest level is compliance. At the compliance level, we form an attitude because it helps us gain rewards or avoid punishment. At the identification level, we form an attitude to conform to another person's or group's expectations. And at the highest level of involvement, which is called internalization, our attitudes become a deep part of our value system. At this level, at this internalization level, attitudes are difficult to change because they are important to us. Now let's talk about the consistency principle. Our nature is to keep our attitudes and behaviors consistent. This is the basis for the principle of cognitive consistency. Further, actually, the theory of cognitive dissonance explains that when we do have inconsistent attitudes and behaviors, we have to find some way to resolve the dissonance and bring our attitudes and behaviors back into consistency. You might have remembered I explained the post-purchase cognitive dissonance. Post-purchase cognitive dissonance is also called buyer's remorse. When you buy something without thinking impulsively, and when you come home and regret of what you have bought, either you are going to return the item and ask for a refund, or you need to find a justification for yourself that you believe in to keep the product. Either or, you need to take an action, either returning the item and get a refund or justifying it to yourself why you have bought it in the first place. You need to minimize the dissonance, because this inconsistency between the attitude of knowing that you didn't need the item that you have bought or you cannot afford it, this is your overall attitude, and the behavior of buying it is inconsistent, and with this inconsistency is actually creating a tension. So you need to resolve the dissonance by bringing your attitude and behavior back into consistency. This is what our consistency principle tells us. Social judgment theory assumes that people assimilate new information about attitude objects in light of what they already know or feel. The initial attitude acts like a frame of reference, and we categorize new information in light of this standard. One important aspect of the theory is that people are different in terms of the information they will find acceptable and unacceptable. They form latitudes of acceptance and rejection around an attitude standard. People will consider and evaluate ideas falling within the latitude favorably, but they are more likely to reject out of those that fall outside of this zone. People tend to perceive messages within their latitude of acceptance as more consistent with their position than those messages that are actually are. We call this exaggeration and assimilation effect. However, we tend to see messages that fall in our latitude of rejection as even more unacceptable than they actually are. This results in an exaggeration we call a contrast effect. For example, discriminating buyers have smaller latitude of acceptance. However, relatively uninvolved consumers consider a wider range of alternatives. They are less likely to be brand loyal and are more likely to switch brands. On the other hand, discriminating buyers who have smaller latitude of acceptance are like the what was the example? Choosy mothers choose Jif peanut butter. For example, this is like choosy mothers will never go with another brand, so they are not open to wider range of alternatives when it comes to peanut butter, and they are very brand loyal, while uninvolved consumers are open to different brands, and they are less likely to be brand loyal and more likely to switch brands without really thinking. Have you ever heard the expression, any friend of Joe's is a friend of mine? Or how about my enemy's enemy is my friend? So I'm sure you have heard about those sayings. This theory, called balance theory, considers how people perceive relations among different attitude objects and how they alter their attitudes so that these remain consistent or balanced. Balance theory considers how a person perceives relations among different attitude objects. This perspective involves relations among three elements, so we call the resulting attitudes as triads. Each triad contains a person, his perceptions of an attitude object, and some other person or object. This theory specifies that we want relations among elements in a triad to be harmonious. If they are unbalanced, if they are inconsistent, this creates tension that we are motivated to reduce by changing our perceptions in order to restore balance. We link elements in one way or another. There are two ways. They can have either a unit relation where we think that a person is somehow connected to an attitude object, something like a belief, or they can have a sentiment relation where a person expresses liking or disliking for an attitude object. In my next slide, I'm going to give you a very simplified example of balance theory so you will understand it better. To see how balance theory might work, consider the following scenario. Kristen would like to date Dan, who is in her consumer behavior class. In balance theory terms, Kristen has a positive sentiment relation with Dan. Check the slide on the triads. One day, Dan shows up in a class wearing an earring. Dan has a positive unit relation with the earring. Men who wear earrings are a turn off to Kristen. She has a negative sentiment relation with men's earrings. As you see, we have an unbalanced triad on the left. According to the balance theory, Kristen faces an unbalanced triad. And figure also shows that she will experience pressure to restore balance by altering some aspects of the triad. How can she do that? She could decide that she does not like Dan after all, or her liking for Dan could prompt her to decide that earrings on men are really pretty cool. She might even try to negate the unit relation between Dan and the earring by deciding that he must wear it as a part of a fraternity initiation, so this reduces the free choice element. Finally, she could choose to leave the field by accepting a date with Dan's roommate, let's say Doe, who doesn't wear an earring but who has an awesome tattoo. Please acknowledge that although the theory does not specify which of these routes Kristen will choose, the theory does predict that she will change one or more of her perceptions to achieve balance. Of course, although this example is an oversimplified representation of most attitude processes, it helps to explain a number of consumer behavior phenomena. Then, how do marketers change attitudes? Marketers try to persuade consumers, and these persuasion attempts are based on basic psychological principles. There are six approaches to persuasion, as shown in the slide. The first one is reciprocity. We are more likely to give if we first receive. That's why, for example, including money in a mail survey questionnaire, in some cases as little as a nickel or dime, increases the response rate compared to surveys that come without financial incentives in the envelope. The second persuasion strategy is scarcity. Uh, like people, items are more attractive when they are not available. In one study, researchers asked people to rate the quality of chocolate chip cookies. Participants who only got one cookie liked them better than those who evaluated more of the same kind of cookie. That helps to explain actually why we tend to value limited edition items, especially like brands for Supreme when they produce limited numbers of items. Actually, Supreme is known with its strategy of scarcity of supply. When they produce limitedly, people are more willing to buy their items and willing to pay more for one item. The third strategy is authority. We believe in authoritative source much more than one that is less authoritative. That psychological trait explains why actually the US public's opinion on one issue, on a problem, can shift by as much as 2% when the New York Times runs an article about it. The third strategy is consistency. As we actually saw previously in this chapter, people try not to contradict themselves in terms of what they say and do about an issue. I'm going to give you an example from a study again. In one study, students at an Israeli university who solicited donations to help disabled people doubled the amount they normally collected in a neighborhood if they first asked the residents to sign a petition supporting the cause 2 weeks before they actually asked for the donations. Once people sign the petition, they feel contradicted if they don't donate 2 weeks after. The fifth strategy is liking. We agree with those we like or admire. Another study found that good looking fundraisers raised almost twice as much as other volunteers who were not as attractive, unfortunately. And the last strategy is consensus. We consider what others do before we decide what to do. People are more likely to donate to a charity if they first see a list of the names of their neighbors who have already done so. Marketers traditionally rely on the communications model that you see on this figure 8.4. This model specifies the elements they need to control to communicate with their customers. One of these is the source, where the communication originates, source sends the messages. Another is the message itself. There are many ways to say something, and the structure of the message has a significant effect on how we perceive it. We must transmit the message using a medium, which could be a TV, radio, magazines, billboards, personal contact, or even a matchbook cover. One or more receivers interpret the message in light of their own experiences. Finally, the source receives feedback so that the marketer can use receivers' reactions to modify aspects of the message as necessary. As I said, this figure is illustrating the traditional communication model. However, this model doesn't work as well in some situations, like those include social media. The traditional communication model is not entirely wrong, of course, but it also doesn't tell the whole story, especially in today's dynamic world of interactivity, where consumers have many more choices available to them and greater control over which messages they choose to process from different platforms. Exciting technological and social developments make us rethink the picture of passive consumers that we see in traditional communication model, as people increasingly play more proactive roles in communications. In other words, we are to a greater extent partners rather than just passive receivers in the communication process. Our input helps to shape the messages we and others like us to receive. Additionally, we may look for these messages rather than sit home and wait to see them on TV or in the paper. As we all know, we are all following world news even on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. And we choose which channels, which pages, which profiles to follow. So the messages that we are willing to be exposed are based on our own willingness. Another example is Pinterest. I'm sure you have known it, that allows users to create digital scrapbooks. But in the process, it serves as a voyage of discovery as people pull images, pin images from many different sources, and they create their own boards. This kind of new medium allows consumers to dream out loud and also guide one another towards new brands and products. Therefore, the figure 8.5 shows an updated model which accounts for the new developments like social media that now affect the communications process. The revised communications model accounts for many new forms of messages that have risen as social media developed. For example, now we have commerce, which is called mobile commerce. Marketers promote goods and services using wireless devices such as smartphones, tablets, laptops. Also, we have new social media platforms for advertising, for messages, blogs and video blogs. We have vloggers, we have influencers, podcasts, Twitter, Instagram, virtual worlds, widgets. These are all new formats for new messages. As I showed you in the communication model, source is the sender of the message and who creates the message. And in this slide, I'm going to briefly explain you some related terminology to source. Source credibility refers to a communicator's expertise, objectivity, and trustworthiness. Disclaimers typically happen at the end of a commercial message that show additional information the advertiser is by law required to provide. The sleeper effect is when, after a while, people appear to forget about the negative source and change their attitudes anyway. Knowledge bias implies that a source's knowledge about a topic is not correct, is not accurate. And reporting bias occurs when a source has the required knowledge, but we question his or her willingness to convey it accurately, as when a racket manufacturer pays a star tennis player to use its products exclusively. There are so many decisions to make about how we say what it is that we want to say. The questions listed in the slide are some of the decisions marketers must make about messages. For example, should we use pictures or words? How often should message be repeated? Should it draw an explicit conclusion? Should it show both sides of the argument? Should it explicitly compare product to competitors? Should it arouse emotions? Should it be concrete or based on imagery? Messages may have good or bad characteristics. To be effective, messages shouldn't cover too much information or distract the receiver. Let's look at the characteristics of good and bad messages that I included in the slide. Positive effects, for example, are showing convenience of use. Negative effects, one of the negative effects is extensive information on components, ingredients, or nutrition, giving too many information to consumers. Another positive effect is showing new product or improved features. while the negative effect can be the outdoor setting that you show too much that your main message gets lost in an advertising or in your commercial. Another positive effect is casting the background. People are incidental to message. A negative effect can be large number of on-screen characters. And this list can be multiplied, can be longer, but these are some positive and negative effects of messages that shows the messages positive effects on consumers and the negative effects. Should we repeat the message? Repetition can be a double-edged sword for marketers. As we covered in chapter 4, we usually need multiple exposures to a stimulus before learning occurs. People tend to like things that are more familiar to them, even if they didn't like them initially. According to the two-factor theory, the fine line between familiarity and boredom is very thin. The two factor theory explains and proposes that separate psychological processes operate when we repeatedly show an advertising to a viewer. The positive side of repetition is that it increases familiarity and reduces uncertainty about the product. But the negative side is that boredom increases with each exposure. At some point, the boredom is greater than the amount of reduced uncertainty, and then the wear out begins. The figure on the slide shows this relationship, the relationship of number of exposures, its positive effect, a negative effect, and the neutral effect. The two factor perspective implies that advertisers can overcome this problem if they limit the amount of exposure per repetition. For example, use of 15-second spots instead of longer commercials. Also, marketers can maintain familiarity but minimize boredom if they slightly vary the content of the advertising over time. Although each spot might be different than each other, the campaign, the whole marketing campaign, still should revolve around a common theme. So consumers know that it is the same product, but the message is different. Or the commercials are slightly different than each other, so that they get excited to watch it again. Consumers who see different ads about the product absorb more information about the product attributes and will experience more positive thoughts about the brand than those who see the same information repeatedly. Comparative advertising enables a brand to compare itself to another on specific attributes. However, it can result in a negative outcome because consumers may doubt the reliability. On the slide, I showed you an example from McDonald's Big Mac versus Burger King's Whopper. In all cases, the advertiser must have documentary evidence so they can back up any claims that they make on their commercial or print advertising. They have to back up their statements, statistics that they give about their products and services. The advertiser must also be careful not to exaggerate the benefits of their products and services or understate the benefits of their competitors. The use of branded products in movies is an old practice, but it has renewed attention as brands pay large amounts of money to be included in popular TV shows and programming. Sometimes the product placement is free because the director wants to use the branded props for realism. Other times the placement comes with a fee. The practice is called branded entertainment Sometimes because the brands are sponsoring the TV shows, like the American Idol. American Idol is sponsored by Coca-Cola, and I'm going to show you more examples of branded entertainment in my next slides. When we see such as the Lenovo computer or phone on James Bond movies, it's product placement. Some researchers claim that product placement helps consumers to make decisions because consumers are then familiar with the brands when they shop. However, others say that placements can be negative influence on consumers' decisions if they are not congruent, they are not harmonious with the plot. The placement has to make sense in the minds of the consumers in order to be effective. Let me show you the statistics. Consumers somewhat resist branded entertainment, especially when it is not a good fit or with the company and the program's plot, or feels forced. As we see, 47% of consumers says that branded entertainment only works if the brand fits with the entertainment. What is branded entertainment? What is the difference of branded entertainment from product placement? Is that the brands are sponsoring the whole TV show. Like Project Runway is sponsored by Marie Claire magazine and Mary Kay Cosmetics. America's Next Top Model is sponsored by CoverGirl. Advert gaming is another concept that we will cover today. Many brands have used advert gaming, including Axe, Burger King, and Mini Cooper. The games keep the attention of players longer than typical advertising. They let marketers target specific types of consumers. Marketers can tailor and adapt the nature of the game and the products in it to the profiles of different users so that marketers can target specific types of consumers. The format gives advertisers a great deal of flexibility. And lastly, the games enable marketers to track exposure to advertising in the games. Therefore, advertisers gain many benefits with advert games. That's why it's a common use nowadays. Lastly, in this chapter, I want to talk about message appeal and how we create marketing messages for our products. We combine emotion and logic when we create an advertising message because the combination of emotion and logic gets the attention of the consumer. We have two types of appeals: informational appeal and emotional appeal. Informational appeal is based on factual information and strong arguments about the key benefits of the product, so it is more utilitarian. Emotional appeal aims to satisfy consumers' emotional desires rather than their utilitarian needs. Whether to use emotional or rational argument, with rational argument means informational appeal, depends on the situation and the product. It may also depend on the relationship consumers have with the product, so you need to be careful when you choose your appeal type. This is an example on the slide about an informational appeal. It is an advertising for the sexy green car show that has been held in UK and England. It shows multiple ways consumers can educate themselves and act in a more environmentally conscious manner when it comes to buying cars. Information appeal is more informative. It is based on strong arguments and facts, and it is less visual, and because it is more serious, more rational, it is considered a little bit boring. That's why more serious and vulnerable topics, vulnerable and sensitive products are using informational appeal, such as drugs or prescribed medicine. When there is a high risk to safety, when there is a high perceived risk to the well-being of the consumer, informational appeal works better. On the other hand, emotional message appeals are more fun, are more appealing for consumers. There are different types of emotional message appeals. I only listed a couple of them on this slide. Sex appeals can be good for getting attention but also come with risks. Humor is also a good choice for gaining attention, but the advertiser has to be careful that the humor does not overwhelm the primary message. Fear appears fear emphasizes the negative consequences that can occur unless the consumer changes a behavior or an attitude. Comfort is always getting a positive reaction from the consumers, and happiness, same way, always create a positive attitude in the mind of the consumers. In my next slides, I'm going to show you examples of emotional appeal advertising. Let's look at this advertising. Partying too hard. Do you know who you are living with? Stick with your friends. Keep a safe cab number handy. Be wary of offers of help. Don't take that shortcut home. Make sure your celebrations don't end in tears. By showing the negative consequences of acting otherwise, this advertising from Wendorf company is actually using fear and safety appeal. The second example from Ocean Spray helps protect you inside. It shows the woman wearing a face mask, 10 hours of cleansing and purifying. On the other hand, 1 glass of water. They use humor appeal in their advertising. Tropicana, I already uploaded their advertising on Canvas. You can watch their commercial. Once you watched it, please come back to this slide, because in their advertising, in their campaign of Awake to Alive, they use the happiness appeal. And look at this advertising from Axe, New Axe Anarchy, for him, for her, Unleash the Chaos. 3 different print advertising. In all of them, they are so impressed by each other that they're almost gonna kill each other with the dangerous things on their hands. But of course, this advertising is using self-love and sex appeal. And lastly, Kleenex, softness worth sharing. Know someone who could use a little extra care with their care pack. This advertising uses comfort appeal in advertising. The last model that I want to discuss in this chapter is the elaboration likelihood model, which is also known as ELM. The elaboration likelihood model assumes that under conditions of high involvement, we will take the central route to persuasion, but under conditions of low involvement, we will take a peripheral route. The central route is focused on the consumer's cognitive response to the message. So the route to persuasion depends on whether the decision is high or low involvement. The peripheral route focuses on other cues to decide how to react to the message. As said, high involvement decisions affect us directly, and we process them centrally. We pay attention to messages cognitively and change attitudes. So the communication comes, and then in high involvement processing, we give first cognitive response, then we change our belief and attitude, and then we change our behavior at the end. While in low involvement decisions, we do not require direct attention, and we are more influenced by peripheral cues, non central to us, that may impact our beliefs about something, which then leads to a behavior change, and at the end, our overall attitude changes. As a chapter summary, what we learned in this chapter are that attitudes are very powerful and they are formed in several ways. People try to maintain consistency among their attitudinal components and their attitudes and behaviors. The communications model includes several important components which can be influenced by marketers to enhance the persuasiveness of the message. The communications model identifies several important components for marketers when they try to change consumers' attitudes toward products and services. The consumer who processes such a message is not necessarily the passive receiver of information marketers once believed him to be, because right now we are also active producers of message due to social media and due to developments of internet. The way a marketer structures his message determines how persuasive it will be. And lastly, audience characteristics helps to determine whether the nature of the source or the message itself will be relatively more effective. This is it for this chapter. Please let me know if you have any questions, if something is not clear about this chapter.